Okay, students, welcome again. The next topic. In this topic, I'm going to make you understand what is the uh, how we define a crime against humanity, and thereafter the element of the crime. So, students, uh, the definition of the crime against humanity, which any account of the crimes against humanity will have to provide an answer to two questions. One, the one is the conceptual question of how we should understand the notion of the crime against humanity. In other words, what do we mean when we label certain crimes against humanity? The other is the normative question of what justifies the international prosecution of these crimes. In other simple words, why does international community have the right to prosecute and punish crime against humanity? Normally, states have exclusive jurisdiction over the crimes committed within their borders, their boundaries. But in the case of crime against humanity, this right uh, can be go beyond the boundaries by the right of the international community to punish them. What is the justification for this right? The two questions are obviously connected, since the reasons why crimes against humanity are to be prosecuted by the international community rather than by the domestic community will depend on those features that distinguish them from the domestic crimes. But this is precisely why we should not lose sight of the distinction. It is important that we bear in mind the implication of the labeling something as a crime against humanity. So, in this part, I suggest a new answer to the conceptual question. In the next section, this answer will be employed to tackle the normative question. So there are two main ways of understanding crime against humanity: is crimes against humans, that is the crime that somehow violate the core humanity that we will share, or as crimes against the humankind, that is the crimes that harm not only their direct victims and possibly the political community, but all human beings. According to the formal understanding, what is at stake when crimes against humanity are committed is the violation of the value humanness, which is offended by these crimes. According to the latter, what is at stake is an attack against a set of individuals, humankind, which is the harmed by them. What I intend to offer here is a version of the first view. My suggestion is that each of the acts listed in the definition of the crime against humanity of the Rome Statute. So, in this connection, first, the most recent and arguably the most comprehensive definition of the crime against humanity appears in the Article 7 of the Rome Statute or Statute of the International Criminal Code, which is, I'm going to read out, I'm going to present the definition which is mentioned in the Article 7, Clause 1 of the ICC Statute. For number one, the number one factor element which is defined in the Article 7. For the purpose of this statute, crime against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as the part of the widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with the knowledge of the attack, that is the murder, enslavement, deportation, or forcible transfer of the population, imprisonment, or other severe deprivation of the physical liberty in violation of the fundamental rules of the international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any other form of the sexual violence of the comparable gravity. And prosecution against any individual group or collectivity on the political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender is defined in the paragraph 3 or other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under the international law in connection with any act referred to this paragraph or any crime within the jurisdiction of the court. Enforce disappearance of the persons, the crime of the upper head, and other inhuman acts of the similar character, intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to the body or mental physical health. So, ICC statute expanded the list of the acts by adding forced transfer of the population, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, sexual violence, enforced disappearances, and crime of the upper hand. These are the modification or additional meaning of the previous article, which I defined earlier. The ICC statute did not include the requirement of the armed conflict in order to enforce these crimes, and the requirement of the discriminatory grounds, which is the Article 7.2 of the ICC statute, also included further definition in an attempt to clarify the elements of the particular offenses. Why does it mean that the crimes against humanity deny their victims status of human being? I will suggest that these crimes deny their victims status of the human being because they violate some basic human rights of their victims. Crimes involving human rights violation of this sort of constitute an assault on the humanity of the victims, and it is in this sense that they are to be considered against the humanity. In developing my argument, I will suggest to the traditional conception of the human rights as those rights that we have simply in virtue of our humanity. So let me start by briefly outlining this conception. According to this view, the role of human rights is to protect the dignity attached to the status of human being. All human beings are supposed to enjoy these rights no matter where they live, no matter what their social or economic condition is, and no matter whether these rights are included in the constitution of their state. These rights belong to human beings as such. A full discussion of this conception is obviously beyond the scope of this lecture, but let me highlight what I want to be its two key features before I go on to the further next topic, to explain how this is the relevant for the notion of the crimes against humanity that I intend to give you idea. The first feature, students, is that idea that human rights are pre-institutional. Individual possess them in a pre-political state of nature, and this is why they do not depend for their existence on their being embodied in any political institutions or on their being recognized in any political doctrines. The second feature is the claim that human rights are ultimately to be justified with the respect to the idea of the dignity of the human person. Of course, there's some disagreement as to how we should understand both the concept of the dignity and the concept of the human in this context, which not to mention the disagreement over what these rights and their implications are. Still, human dignity is the notion that this conception typically appeals and recognized to the all. The notion of the dignity plays a double role here. Firstly, human dignity is the value that explains why all human beings can be said to have the human rights. It is the virtue of their intrinsic dignity. However, we understand the notion that human beings are in possession of these rights. Secondly, human dignity constitutes the ultimate value that human rights are supposed to project. These rights protect human dignity by placing limits on how human beings can be treated. The idea here is that in order to lead a life of dignity, human beings need to be protected against the certain standard threats. So human rights protect them against these threats so that they can have a minimally a decent life where they live and how they want to they live. So that is the reason why all human beings possess the human rights, independently of their social relationship and undertaking. Is that all human beings are entitled to live a life of dignity. So that's why the atrocities against the relationship and those undertaking which will curtail the independence and the liberty of the human beings, all human beings which they possess. So that constitute those widespread atrocities, the crimes against humanity. So students, after understanding the definition and idea of the crime against humanity, I move on the next topic, that is the elements of the uh, crimes against humanity. Students, the elements of the crimes which constitute the offense of the crimes against humanity. The general introduction is that pursuant to Article 9, the following elements of the crime shall assist the court in the interpretation and application of the Article 6, 7, and 8 consistent with the statute. The provision of the statute, including Article 21 and the general principle set out in Part 3 and applicable to the elements of the crime. As stated in Article 30, unless otherwise provided, a person shall be criminally responsible and liable for the punishment for a crime within the jurisdiction of the court only if the material element are committed with intent and knowledge, where no reference is made in the element of crime to a mental element for any particular conduct, consequences, or circumstances listed. It is understood that the relevant mental element, that is the intent, knowledge, or both, set out in the Article 30 applies. Exceptions to the Article 30 uh, standard based on the statute, including applicable law under its relevant provisions, are indicated, which are defined is number three. The existence of intent and knowledge can be inferred from the relevant facts and circumstances. With respect to the mental element associated with the element involving value judgment, such as those using the term inhuman or severe, it is not necessary that the perpetrator personally completed a particular value judgment unless otherwise indicated. Grounds for excluding criminal responsibility or the absence thereof are generally not specified in the crimes element of the crimes listed which under each crime. The requirement of the unlawfulness found in the statute or in other parts of the international law, in particular international humanitarian law, is generally not specified in the element of crimes. The element of crimes are generally structured in accordance with the following principles. As the element of crimes focus on the conduct, consequences, and the circumstances associated with each crime, they are generally listed in that order. When required, a particular mental element is listed after the affected conduct, consequence of or circumstances, contextual circumstances which are listed last. As used in the elements of crime, the term perpetrator is natural as to guilt or innocence. The elements, including the appropriate mental element, apply mutatis mundus to all those criminal responsibility may fall under the Article 25, 28 of the statute. A particular conduct may constitute one or more crimes. The use of the short titles for the crimes has no legal effect. So the general requirement for the crimes against humanity under the ICC statute, there must be an attack. Uh, the attack must be widespread or systematic. The attack must be directed against a civilian population. The perpetrator's conduct was part of the widespread or systematic attack. The perpetrator was aware of the link between his acts and the widespread or systematic attack. After the general requirement, I'm going to short my this lecture by giving you the reference of the Article 7 of the ICC statute, which gives us the element of the crime which constitute crime against humanity. Of the Article 7, which actually gives us the elements of the crime which constitute that offense. Since the Article 7 pertains to the international criminal law, its provisions consistent with the Article 22 must be strictly construed, taking into account that crimes against humanity as defined in the Article 7 are among the most serious crimes of the concern to the international community as a whole. Warrant and entail individuals' criminal responsibility and requires conduct which is impermissible under generally applicable international law as recognized by the principal legal systems of the world. The last two elements for each crime against humanity describe the context in which the conduct must take place. These elements clarify the requisite participation in and knowledge of the widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. Directed against the civil population in these context, element is understood to mean a course of conduct involving the multiple commission of the acts referred to in Article 7, paragraph 1 of the statute against any civilian population pursuant to or in furtherance of the state or organizational policy to commit such attack. The act needs not constitute a military attack. It is understood that policy to commit such attack requires that the state or organization actively promote or encourage such an attack against a civilian population. Um, Elements which are provided in Article 7, paragraph 1, clause A, crimes against listed crimes and their elements. The first listed crime in that article against the crime against humanity, that is the murder, crime against humanity of the murder. The elements in that offense, the perpetrators killed one or more persons. The conduct was committed as part of the widespread or systematic attack directed against the civilian population. The perpetrator knew that the conduct was part of the intended the conduct to be part of the widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. Number second, that is the Article 7, paragraph 1, clause B, against the humanity of the extermination elements. The perpetrators killed one or more persons, including by inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the part of the population. The conduct constituted or took place as part of mass killing of the members of the civilian population. The conduct was committed as part of the widespread or systematic attack directed against the civilian population. Next crime, that is the installment in class C of same article. Elements are these: the perpetrator exercise any or all powers attaching to the right of the ownership over one or more persons, such as the purchasing, selling, lending, or bartering such a person or persons, or by imposing on them a similar deprivation of the liberty. The conduct was committed as part of the widespread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population. The same clause, that is, the perpetrators knew that the the actus and mens rea of the part of that element. And the class G of the same article, that is regarding the crime against humanity of the deportation or forcible transfer of the population. The elements required regarding that offense, the perpetrator deported or forcibly transferred without grounds permitted under the international law one or more persons to another state or location by expulsion or other policy events. And the elements are same. The offense must be such persons or persons lawfully present in the area from which they were deported or transferred, and the perpetrator was aware. The awareness and the gravity, the wider spread, and the immensity and intensity of further elements. The class E regarding the crime against immunity of the imprisonment of the severe deprivation of the physical liberty. The element of these crimes, the perpetrator imprisoned one or more persons or otherwise severely deprived one or more persons of the physical liberty. The gravity of the conduct was such that it was in violation of the fundamental rules of the international law, and perpetrator must knew aware of the factual circumstances that establish the gravity of the conduct, and the further the element, the wider spread, and the actors imagery of the further element of that crime. The class F of the same article, which is a crime against the torture. The elements of that crime is that the perpetrators inflicted severe physical or mental pain or suffering upon one or more persons. Such persons or persons were in the custody or under the control of the perpetrator. Such pain and suffering did not arise only from and was not inherent in incidental to lawful sections, and conduct must be wider spread, and the actors and mens rea one of the element to constitute that offense. Class G, Part 1, crime against the rape. The element of that crime, the perpetrator invaded the body of persons by conduct resulting penetration, however slight, or any of part of the body of the victim or of the perpetrators with a sexual organ or of the other elements which require the rape, and the invasion was committed by force or by threat of force or coercion, such as that caused by fear of the violence, duress, detention, psychological oppression, or abuse of the power against such persons or another person, or by taking advantage of the coercive environment, or the invasion was committed against the person incapable of giving genuine consent, and the gravity is the same, the wider spread, and the elements further which constitute that offense are the men actus rea and mens rea, the knowledge of the offense. And the clause G, part 2 of that offense, that crime against humanity of the sexual slavery. Uh, that is the gravitation of the same offense of the rape and thereafter make them slave. And the elements are the almost same, but keep them in a confine those victims. The part 3 of that same clause, same offense, crime against immunity of enforced prostitution, and use those slaves in order to doing the prostitution. And the wider spread, the same elements are required, but the one element which is the modifier, which is the additional, that is the use those victims for the prostitution. Another, and forced pregnancy with the knowledge, with the intention, make them pregnant of those victims. So also another, that is the five same class, the five category of that crime against humanity of the enforced sterilization. The elements of that offense, the perpetrators deprive one or more persons of biological reproductive capacity. The conduct was neither justified by the medical or hospital treatment of the persons or persons concerned, nor carried out with their genuine concern. The conduct spread is a wider spread and magnus rea and mens rea. The part six of the same the sexual violence. Violence means barbaric act and forcible act with a violence, with a torture, with any forceful element which is the make them a sexual violence in that. Thereafter, the next offense clause H of the same article, crime against humanity of the persecution. The element of that offense, the perpetrator severely deprived, contrary to international law, one or more persons of the fundamental rights. The perpetrator targeted such persons or persons by reason of the identity of the group collectively or targeted the group or collectively as such. The targeting was based on the political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender as defined in the Article 7, paragraph 3 of the statute or other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law. The conduct was committed in connection with the any act referred in class 7 paragraph 1 of the statute of any crime within the jurisdiction of the court, and the crime must be committed as a wider spread systematic attack and the actus rea mens rea which constitute that crime. And class I of the same article and paragraph 1, crime against the humanity of the enforced disappearances of the person. The elements are the perpetrator arrested, detained, or abducted one or more persons, or refused to acknowledge the arrest, detention, or abduction, or to give information on the false or whereabouts of such persons. Such arrest, detention, or abduction was followed or accompanied by and further elements which are provided. The list is long, so it will take time if I will read here for you. So you can read it yourself in Article 7, paragraph 1, clause I. The next offense, that is the clause of the same article and paragraph, crime against immunity of upper head. The perpetrator committed an inhuman act against the one or more persons. Such acts was an act referred in the Article 7, paragraph 1 of the statute was an act of the character similar to any other. The perpetrator was aware of the factual circumstances that established the character of that act. The conduct was committed in the context of the institutionalized regime of the systematic operation and the domination by any racial group over any other racial group or groups. The other elements are same, which I have already mentioned earlier. The wider spread and mens rea actus rea. The clause A, which constitute the offense against immunity of the other inhuman acts. This is the last clause, last element of that offense. The element the perpetrator inflicted a great suffering or serious injury to the body or to the mental or physical health by the means of an inhuman act. Such act was a character similar to any other act referred in Article 7, paragraph 1 of the statute, and the perpetrator was aware of the factual circumstances that established the character of the act. The conduct was committed as part of the wider spread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population. The perpetrators knew that the conduct was part of the intended the conduct to be part of the wider spread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population. Students, these are the list of crimes which are mentioned in the Article 7, paragraph 1 of the Rome Statute, ICCC Statute, and their elements which constitute those offenses, and the prosecution of that offenses invoke the jurisdiction of the ICC in order to prosecute those offenses which are committed against the civilian population, being wider spread and target any individual or group. So I hope this lecture help you a lot in order to understand this topic. And